Hare Krishna, welcome to another conversation on the importance of reading Srila Prabhupada's books. My name is Krishna Prem Rupa Das. I'm serving here at ISKCON Zurich and for the ISKCON Ministry of Education with this project, Books Are the Basis. And we are trying to encourage and inspire devotees to read more often in Srila Prabhupada's books. And we are very happy and honored to have today with us His Holiness Bhakti Vijnana Goswami Maharaj. Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Prema Prabhu. I'm also very happy to be with you today. Thank you for inviting me for this important session.
Thank you, Maharaj. Maharaj is well known in our movement. Still, I like to briefly introduce Maharaj. Maharaj originally was born in Tashkent, if I pronounced it properly, in the former Soviet Union, which is now, I think, the capital city of Uzbekistan. And Maharaj started to get in touch with the devotees as a young man in 1980, beginning 1980, I believe. And as we know, that was a difficult time of the communist era when the KGB, the Committee for State Security, was harassing people who were into spiritual practice. Nevertheless, Maharaj showed interest and got in touch with the devotees. At that time, Maharaj was a Moscow State University graduate, also a postgraduate student at the Institute of Molecular Biology, so had a scientific background, and then started to practice Bhakti Yoga, Krishna consciousness, and very seriously, actually, Maharaj, from 1988 to 1905, served, as that time known as Vijnana Prabhu, served as the head of the translation department for the BBT, translating books into Russian language. So here we see also the connection to this Books Are the Basic. And of course, Maharaj also officially took the lead of the Russian Yatra and also served as a GBC, I think, for 20 years. Is that right, Maharaj?
Yes.
And also, also accepted the order. 21 years, and also accepted the renounced order of life, sannyas. That also since 20 years now. I think this year is 20 years. And Maharaj also serves as a spiritual master since 2005. Of course, Maharaj is known as a scholar and a wonderful teacher. And of course, everyone who has interacted with Maharaj understands also that he is wonderful, exemplary Vaishnava with all saintly qualities. So we're very happy to have your association, Maharaj.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words. I don't deserve them, but I accept them as blessings.
Well, these were just, we should, of course, glorify much more, but maybe we can start with hearing a bit about your journey, because quite interesting that you got in touch with the devotees in these difficult times. So what was the first book that you read, or the first scripture, and how did that change your life and brought you to Krishna consciousness?
The first book was Bhagavad Gita, but not Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita, because at that time Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita was not available in Russian. And it was not available in English as well. At that time, in the Soviet Union, religious books were strictly prohibited, even though BBT had a couple of successful book fairs in Moscow in 1977 during Prabhupada's time, when Gopal Krishna Maharaj came to Moscow, and 1979 subsequently when Kirtiraj Prabhu came with the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust bookstore for the book fair. And they sold very huge amount of books. Still, it was very insignificant number. But my friend and roommate in the university hostel, he somehow or other he got hold of these books, and he visited this book fair. Somehow or other, again, I don't know why, he didn't give me Prabhupada's book. He gave me a Russian translation of Bhagavad Gita, which was done before revolution. It was a very funny book with a little archaic language. with some, some claim to be a poetic translation of Bhagavad Gita. But still, this little book, even though it was not Prabhupada's book, changed my life completely.
Oh, yeah.
I read this little book, and I had it had such a tremendous impact on me that the immediate reaction, I read it very quickly within just a few hours, and the immediate reaction, which I still remember very clearly, if this book is true, and it seems to be true, I have to change my life. I have to adjust my life according to the truth which is speaking through this book. Actually, only one book before that had a similar impact on my consciousness or on my heart. That was the New Testament, which I read. And again, it was strictly prohibited. Somehow or other, I got hold a copy of the New Testament from one of the university students. And I just could feel that there's something behind this. It's not just a book. It's the truth in the form of the book. But the difference was that when I read the New Testament, there was nobody whom I could ask, what should I do now? But in case of Bhagavad Gita, there was my friend, and I asked him, what should I do now? I read this book, I have to adjust my life, I have to change my life. What should I do? And, I didn't even ask him this question. He himself gave me beads and said, chant Hare Krishna. So I took it as an indication, and I started chanting Hare Krishna without knowing much who is Krishna even, because in this edition of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna's personality was not really emphasized as in Prabhupada's books. He was rather, on the background, and but still, nevertheless, I started chanting just because I felt compelled. The book was so compelling and so rational. I mean, it's not that I believed in everything, but I couldn't just dismiss it. I couldn't just say, "Oh, it's just a book." Again, I felt it is the truth, and it's a compelling truth, and at least it's worth of my investigation. So that's basically because I'm, as you said, I have some scientific background and some scientifically conditioned mind. I thought this is something which I should investigate a little more. And just a couple of words more in this regard. What actually really struck me about Bhagavad Gita is that it gives a completely different worldview, not the worldview which I, used to, which was taught from, by my university professors, by my parents, by my grandparents, by the teachers in the school, by virtually everyone in the Soviet Union, because, the atheism was the only religion in the former Soviet Union. There was no other religion. The atheism, it was called scientific atheism. So the scientific atheism was the religion which was very aggressively preached in the Soviet Union. But what struck me in Bhagavad Gita is that, the usual image of religion or religious book which we used to have is that it's something very irrational, outdated, irrational, not logical, which you have to blindly believe. But in Bhagavad Gita, I saw the book which describes a very rational, even though different, but nevertheless rational, logical, and beautiful picture of the creation of the world around me, and that really intrigued me because I didn't expect that much logical consistency in a religious book. So that's what really impressed me. And of course, later when I met Prabhupada's books and read Prabhupada's books in English and some of them in Russian, I also felt that it's extremely logical and rational.
Yeah, I just thought it must be quite an amazing experience to read afterwards Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita to just reconfirm and make the understanding much deeper, right?
I read Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita much later because, again, as I said, at that time, Prabhupada's books were not really available. All the few rare copies of Prabhupada's books in English were, I mean, they were really, really rare. And besides, KGB, as you said, you know, whenever they had a chance, they would confiscate this book. And to keep this book was dangerous, you know, because if you were found to keep this book, you know, it would be an offense against the state laws. So I didn't read Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita immediately after that, but I did get hold of perfect questions, perfect answers, Rajavidya, the King of All Knowledge, some small books. And I read them with some interest, trying to understand what is behind. In the meantime, I was chanting Hare Krishna all the time. But still, I was not convinced. I didn't consider myself to be a devotee or follower of Prabhupada. I was just reading it out of curiosity and out of respect to my friend, and of course, respect to Srila Prabhupada, who commanded respect in his books. But the first big book which I read was actually his first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. And that was also a very interesting story, how I got hold of it and how I managed to read this book.
You like to share that briefly with us, or?
Yeah, actually, again, my friend who was very instrumental in bringing me to Krishna consciousness, his name is Japa Das. He's initiated devotee. He's still a devotee. He lives in California at the moment. He came to Tashkent. That was later. Actually, I had to leave Moscow because devotees, you know, KGB started persecuting devotees, and it was before that. Actually, it was before that. Anyway, he came to Tashkent when I was there for vacation, I believe, and he brought this first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, and he didn't know English himself, so he couldn't read this book. But he said to me, "You know English. Why don't you translate this book for me?"
Very early translation.
In one sense, it was his trick to make me, read the big book and to be more involved. And I agreed, and I started translating. Actually, the first book which I was translating was, he specifically asked to translate the second chapter of the first canto. And I started translating the second chapter of the first canto, Divinity and Divine Service. I still remember very clearly. And it was a struggle for me because I couldn't understand, especially the first, I stumbled upon the expression, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I just couldn't figure out what does it mean. Why Godhead? Why? Does it mean that he has head and God has head, or does it mean exactly? I was struggling, but still I was diligently translating and getting into it, and that I was impressed. I must admit I didn't understand much, but but nevertheless I was reading it, and I was very impressed. But then what happened? After reading a few of Prabhupada's books, a very severe Kurukshetra battle started within my heart. The scientific atheistic worldview, with Darwin as a main hero, main disciple of this religion, main proponent of the religion of atheism, and so many other proponents. So this scientific worldview, which was very consistently created within my heart, confronted with the different worldview presented first in Bhagavad Gita, but then, of course, much more prominently and more forcefully by Prabhupada. And they were completely incompatible. You can just, somehow or other pretend that it's okay. So these two worldviews started fighting with each other. I found myself constantly arguing with Prabhupada from the previous position. I was arguing, about this thing and about that thing and about God and about this and that, about practically everything which you can imagine. And I found that Prabhupada defeats me every time I would start arguing with him. Every time I would try to reject his argument, ultimately within my heart I feel, no, he's right and I'm wrong. His logic is more compelling. His logic is actually very solid, even though it may seem little, little dogmatic. Sometimes Prabhupada can, by liberal thinkers, he can be viewed as little dogmatic. But this all because I think, to my little credit, I was somewhat honest. So this was I was honest and bold enough to admit the defeat. And for quite some time, for a few months, this battle was going on. And ultimately, I had to say, okay, I surrender. I don't have any arguments anymore. Prabhupada defeated me completely. And here I am, 40 years later, sitting and speaking about this.
That's very interesting, Maharaj, because Prabhupada also often claimed that his presentation is not a religious but a scientific presentation.
Yes, exactly. It was very logical and scientific, and I kind of I sniffed it. I understood it, and that's why I like it, and I stress it again and again and again that Prabhupada's books are scientific. They are not dogmatic. We should not present them as religious dogmas. They are for people who, for thoughtful people, for them to make their free choice in life, and very important choice.
And then also, we speak about this often in this series of interviews, that how Prabhupada himself said that he will live forever in his books. And obviously, you met Prabhupada in his books.
I did, and I was, not only did I meet him, I was engaged in a very fierce argument with him for quite some time. And it was alive. And I really was arguing not with the books, I was arguing with Prabhupada. You know? And he was there, and I felt that he's very strong, but at the same time, I also felt that he's very compassionate. So this qualities of, the compassion was, was transparent. It was kind of coming through his iron logic.
Okay, that's beautifully expressed, I think, and that brings us to another question in regard to you're also a teacher, and in this systematic study, we speak about the different goals of study, and one is to understand Prabhupada's mood and mission. Would you like to elaborate a little bit on this? I mean, you just mentioned that you felt, while reading Prabhupada's book, you felt his compassion. That's quite a significant statement. How can we access Prabhupada's mood and mission? What does it mean when we read Prabhupada's books to understand his mood and mission?
Of course, very important to understand Prabhupada's mood and mission is to read the books about Prabhupada. And actually, the first book, besides the small books which I also translated, I started translating Prabhupada's books rather early in my life, starting with this first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, some chapters of it, then some other small books like Krishna Consciousness Matches Gift. But then at one point I got hold of, and that was my own copy, I don't remember how, but somebody gave it to me, Prabhupada Lilamrita by Satsvarup Maharaj. And this book also was played a very significant role in my life. I started with the second volume. First volume was not available. Second and third volume, fourth volume. I translated all these 4 volumes. This translation is gone. It was lost, but by just writing in a notebook, I was translating this volume. So that had a very significant influence upon my life. So that's important to understand Prabhupada as a person, as a personality, and then it will shed the light on Prabhupada's books, because again, sometimes when we read Prabhupada's books, they may sound a little harsh, and people, they may, especially people who are a little more external, they may be offended by these harsh statements of Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada is doing it purposefully because he wants us to think, all these very harsh statements of Prabhupada in his books are there to shaken us, to more or less wake us up, because when he says these harsh things, you become offended. He's not just petting your ego all the time. Most of the time, he's just punching your ego. You're this and you're that. That's what he's doing. And but when you know his personality, you understand that that's his compassion. All this, apparent harshness which is there is just because he just so eager to give you Krishna. So that's another thing which is there, the sense of urgency. This is what I also noticed from the very beginning, that this is the man with the mission and this urgent mission. This is what I felt, and also was quite impressed by this, because, when you read some intellectual books, it's nice, but, it's just an intellectual game. Like this Hermann Hesse, you know, famous Swiss writer. You know, it's just a game. You know, and you feel that there is something artificial. But Prabhupada is not. For Prabhupada, it's not a game. It's his life. It's his, you know, urgent desire, which is there. It's actually, this is how Prabhupada's lowlium, eagerness, you know, transpires through his books. It's his glorious spiritual quality, lowlium, his eagerness to be with Krishna, his eagerness to be with Krishna manifest in his eagerness to give Krishna to people who would read his books. So, you know, we really have to read Prabhupada's books through the lens of his personality, knowing his personality. And for that, all the books about Prabhupada, they are invaluable.
Maharaj, you mentioned how it can be sometimes difficult to understand Prabhupada's books because of, you beautifully described the mood behind Prabhupada, but not everyone will understand this in the first place. So you're also involved in I think, developing that course, and you're also teaching the course of ISKCON hermeneutics. Would you like to explain to our viewer what do we understand with hermeneutics, and also then how this actually can help us to understand Srila Prabhupada's books better? And what is the significance for our movement in general?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. It's a very interesting question, and I was thinking recently a lot about this. Why did we start talking about hermeneutics recently? Why was no even, there was no need for hermeneutics, even a few years back, at least there was no felt or pronounced need for hermeneutics. And there is a very important reason for this. The important reason is that we had a privilege of associating with direct disciples of Srila Prabhupada, and we could ask them, what Prabhupada means here. We could ask them, and because, they had such a great influence upon our movement, they were the leaders of our movement. The hermeneutics was very simple. You just go to Prabhupada's disciple and ask him, what does it mean? And how we should understand, and what is behind this, what is the intention of Prabhupada. And he would explain, and we usually would accept the explanation. But what happens now, the third and even fourth generation of ISKCON devotees after Prabhupada. Prabhupada is the first generation, then Prabhupada's disciples, second generation, the disciples of Prabhupada disciples, the third generation, the disciples of Prabhupada disciples is the fourth generation. So it's first of all, due to certain historical unfortunate events, some devotees from the third generation, their faith in Prabhupada's direct disciples was shaken due to some reasons, legitimate and sometimes maybe not legitimate reasons. So they kind of developed certain skepticism, and the skepticism, especially through the media of internet, becomes quite pronounced, quite widespread. So, and then, but because Prabhupada is Prabhupada and they're still reading Prabhupada's books, they started explaining Prabhupada's books or what Prabhupada means in their own way, which sometimes is not correct because they didn't really hear Prabhupada saying this. They were not really in touch with Prabhupada directly, but still, nevertheless, they sometimes very boldly, claim that only they understand Prabhupada, his mood and mission. And therefore, we need the proper tools to understand it in a very impassionate, impartial, and dispassionate, and impartial, and scientific way. So hermeneutics is still is very relevant at this moment of time, because we still can ask second generation, direct disciples of Srila Prabhupada, what Prabhupada meant. We have this privilege, and we can it's also a very important hermeneutical tool, to directly approach somebody who knows, who was there, who was with Prabhupada, who knew how Prabhupada dealt in this situation or that situation, how he was, but we need also some tools, and we have to beware. We have to be aware also about the problems which every one of us conditioned souls have. When we read some statement and try to, misuse it, to more or less force the text into something which we want to extract from the text. So hermeneutics is an extremely important process or discipline which everyone has to learn. And one very important point which I want to stress in this regard is that I like the work which was done on hermeneutics, because it stresses very much that the foundational principle of hermeneutics, which is given in this course, is that we have to see the statements of the Shastra through the media of Srila Prabhupada, not vice versa. Because there are very strong voices in our society who say that Shastra goes first, and Prabhupada should only be accepted when he confirms Shastra. Whatever statement of Prabhupada which somehow or other is not directly confirming Shastra should be basically rejected. That's what they say. And that's a very dangerous tendency and very dangerous approach, because, first of all, because even Narottam Das Thakur, who coined this phrase, Sadhu Shastra Guru, he gave this in this sequence: first Sadhu, then Shastra, and then Guru. As far as the pramana or the force, pramanatva, the authority of the statements. First, the statements of the sadhus, of previous acharyas, and in our case of Srila Prabhupada, then Shastra, because they explain Shastra. Otherwise, how we can understand Shastra? We cannot understand Shastra. Yasyadave parabhaktir yathadave tatha guru tasyaite kathita hyatha prakashante mahatmana. Shastra can only be revealed to us if we have devotion to sadhus, to acharyas, and to our guru, as this verse from Shvetashvatara Upanishad states. And therefore, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, when he explains the first principle of Siddhanta in his Dashamula Tattva, he's very emphatic about this. He says, Amnaya Prahar. He doesn't say Shruti Prahar. He doesn't say Smriti Prahar. He doesn't say Veda Prahar. He says Amnaya Prahar. What is Amnaya? Amnaya is Veda, Veda Vakya. But it's not just Veda. It's Veda Vakya, the statements of the Vedas, which are received through Guru Parampara. This is the specific meaning of the word Amnaya. For us, the main pramana is not the statements of the Shastra, but the statements of the Shastra received through Parampara, through Srila Prabhupada. Not the statements of the Shastra as such, purely outside of the context of, greater Prabhupada's teachings. And therefore, Prabhupada again and again and again quoted this beautiful verse from Mahabharata, that Mahajanaya Nagata Sapanta. Dharmasya tattvam nihitam guhayam. It's very difficult to understand the truths of spiritual truths, the truths of religion. You cannot do it shrutaya vibhina. The shruti is too big. It has too many contradictory statements. It will be ridiculous if you will try to understand shruti, but your own, tiny intelligence, Kali Yuga intelligence, spoiled by, meat eating and intoxication and illicit sex and whatnot, And all these people, they say, we will understand Shastra first, and then we will see if Prabhupada confirms with the Shastra according to our understanding, we will accept it. And if not, it's just his technique. This is I heard again and again and again. This is Prabhupada's technique. Basically, Prabhupada is cheating us. That's what they want to say. That's what they mean to say. No, but this is it's a very dangerous tendency. And we have to really understand that Shrutayo Vibhina and Tarka Apratishta, there is no, our own logic does not have any foundation. And if we hear those devotees who were not in touch directly with Prabhupada, and this is Nasapne Shirya Shamatam Nadinam, every rishi will just speak his own theory, his own mata, his own, interpretation of the Shastra, and therefore Dharmasya Tattvam Nihitam Upayam Mahajanaya Nagata Sapanta, we have to traverse the path which Prabhupada showed to us in his own example. Not to try by our own, endeavors to understand Shastra and, develop what is called overintelligence. Not to be foolish, that foolish. So hermeneutics is very important because it gives us this most important foundational principle that we should impartially and dispassionately study Prabhupada's books and be very introspective and see how, how we are dealing with the statements of Prabhupada and how honest we are and how sincere we are. And then engage with others in a very productive way, trying to establish the truth rather than trying to establish my point of view. And it's a big difference, trying to establish the truth for oneself and for others, or trying to prove that I'm right. This is huge difference. So this hermeneutics is a very important discipline, and we also, as long as ISKCON has common hermeneutics, ISKCON will retain its unity. And if the different ways of understanding Prabhupada's teachings and mood will develop, then inevitably we will follow the usual path of any religion, because there will be this split and that split and this, this ISKCON or that ISKCON, ISKCON Bangalore, ISKCON whatever, with their acharyas.
Thank you for explaining, Maharaj. We can feel that you have a lot of, realization on this topic, and also you emphasize the importance. So basically, we understand Prabhupada himself. He saw himself as a part of the parampara, as a humble servant of Bhakti Siddhanta. So of course, Prabhupada is coming in the parampara and is based on the Shastra. But at the same time, we should understand philosophy through the lens of Prabhupada.
His understanding of parampara, his understanding of Shastra. We have to understand this first, without having this foolish idea that I can understand Shastra myself. Shastra is a revelation. You cannot understand Shastra yourself. It has to be revealed. How it is revealed? Through your service mode. Service mode to whom? To Acharya, to somebody who is the embodiment of this service mode to Krishna and Parampara.
Yeah, that's such an important point. And you're emphasizing that hermeneutics also helps us to, instead of just having this argumentation, Prabhupada said, no, Prabhupada said, but then actually we come on a table and we discuss Prabhupada's statements in a way that we actually just try to understand the truth. And for this, hermeneutics gives us tools, principles to come to a conclusion which everyone will understand, yes, that's actually true, and it's satisfying for everyone, right?
Yeah, I mean, what I can see, and it's actually saddens my heart a lot that there's endless arguments on, any point, starting with, whether Jiva fell from the spiritual sky or not. And it's not that there's endless points of, and starting with this issue and ending with the issue of, vaccination. This is the modern controversy, which is very interesting. But what I can see that there is no culture of discussing it in a civilized way, and it becomes just arguments. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he very clearly says that arguments for the argument's sake is a kind of prajalpa, which we as devotees are not supposed to be engaged in because it's detrimental for bhakti. It creates an obstacle on our devotional path. That's the problem. It's a prajalpa. And this prajalpa, under the banner of, we're fighting for the truth, we're trying to establish the eternal truths, just prajalpa proliferates. And it's kind of, it agitates the mind. The proper discussion, philosophical discussion, creates a peace in mind, creates a very conducive atmosphere in the heart to chant Hare Krishna, to serve devotees, to be in this devotional mood. But all these arguments which are going on with, quotes and counter quotes and, counter quotes upon counter quotes and, so on and so forth, they only agitate the mind. And that's just Kali. It's the age of quarrel under the pretext of, philosophical discussion. It's not philosophical discussion. The real philosophical discussion is very pleasing. It's pleasing to those who hear it. It's pleasing to those who are engaged in it. It's really, it pacifies the mind, not agitates the mind. It has a completely different effect upon your mind. And by all means, we have to try to establish this culture, the other quote-unquote culture, because it's not culture, it's just something anti-cultural. The tradition, which is now more or less almost established in ISKCON of all this endless arguments and, quotes and counter quotes, should stop and, be transformed into a peaceful, sincere, honest culture of dialogue when we engage by, respecting other people, their opinions, at the same time trying to, find the truth from Prabhupada and his followers, and we cannot find ourselves.
So we can see that this ISKCON hermeneutics certainly could help a lot to create that culture where we understand Prabhupada's words better. I see it's getting a little dark in your room.
I can turn on the light if necessary.
Yeah, maybe, and we can slowly conclude our discussion. Yes, that's wonderful. Thank you. So far, we heard about your journey and also your encounter with Prabhupada, and we heard a bit about hermeneutics and the importance of understanding Prabhupada's books properly. Maybe we can conclude with a few words on maybe how to overcome obstacles in reading. Some devotees find it difficult to read Prabhupada's books or dive into Prabhupada's books. And then also, it would be nice to hear from you also how we make sure to apply what we read in Prabhupada's books. As I mentioned in the beginning, I personally, when I hear explanations and hear from you, I feel that you got a lot of realizations. So how can we get to that point where we actually deeply understand and live our life according to Prabhupada's teachings? So these two things, how to overcome the obstacles and then how to apply in our lives.
In my case, I was actually lucky because I've been translating or editing translations of Prabhupada's books for many, many years. And when you do it, you go much deeper because, when you want to translate, you really want to understand not just the words, not just the sentence, but the intended meaning. Because translator is not supposed to translate the words; he translates the meaning. And if you understand the meaning, then this tendency of the mind just to scratch on the surface will overcome, and we will see the depths of the meaning and mood and emotions. Yeah. Recently, I heard a very beautiful lecture by Radhika Raman Prabhu from Utah about Srimad Bhagavatam, and he said a very interesting thing in this lecture. He was speaking about the prayers in Srimad Bhagavatam, and we all know this problem with the prayers in Srimad Bhagavatam. They all sound the same, almost the same, this devotee, and almost inevitably, when somebody meets with the Lord, he starts offering prayers. And, sometimes we just, we already heard these prayers, demigod's prayer, Dhruva Maharaj prayer, or Prithu Maharaj praise, so Bhumi Devi praise, this and that. He said a very interesting thing, which I really liked. He said that if we read these prayers through the lens of the relationship of this particular devotee with the Lord, and understand how in these prayers his emotions are invested and how he expresses his understanding of the Lord, then we can understand the deeper intended meaning behind the prayers. When we so the idea is that when we read with this desire to understand, ultimately to understand the emotion which is driving Srila Prabhupada or a particular hero of Srimad Bhagavatam to say these words, then it will be very emotionally fulfilling because their emotions will be reflected upon our heart. When we when a little glimpse of their emotions or their intentions due to their mercy and by our sincere endeavors to understand them, will be reflected within our heart, we will be greatly rewarded. And it will be very interesting because the reading will not be just, boring sadhana, but it will become an emotional exercise, so to speak. When we are in touch with the emotions, spiritual emotions of Srila Prabhupada or heroes of Srimad Bhagavatam. And of course, another way to overcome this tendency of the mind, which, why it is difficult. Sometimes it's difficult because the mind says, I already know this, I want something new. Why don't we watch a new movie? This I know. But that's an illusion because you don't know this. It's just, you just know a little bit. So another way to overcome this tendency of the mind to say, I already know this, is to try to teach this. When we try to teach this particular chapter of the book or whatever, then we will have to go much deeper into what is said there, or try to write some essay on this or article in this regard, develop certain. So it's also very interesting what Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur says in his Bhagavata essay, when he says that there is this fruitless, how you say this? Does he say fruitless reader? I don't remember the exact word, but the concept behind this is like this. He reads, and the reading does not bear the fruit. Usually, we are not, and that's actually the direct link to the second part of your question, how to apply this. Usually, we don't say that the reading should be fruitful in a good sense, fruitful that it should bring some real fruits. But he says that this reader who is just reading the book and he's, nothing is happening within his heart because his mind and intelligence remain dormant. But when you somehow rather manage to awake the intelligence, and the intelligence will start, working and developing this idea and applying this idea to the reality around you and trying to understand how it really works in your life or in the life of other people. And that, for me at least, the easiest way to do it is to try to explain this to others. And I'm trying to explain this to others. I first try to see, how it is true, how it works in reality, and then when I feel that I understood it, then I can explain it to others, and then of course it becomes a little easier to apply it because this is the angle through which or by which you are reading these books and trying to understand what it means in reality. But it's not easy because there are so many different instructions, and these instructions are given, to people with different levels of advancement, and you really need guidance in this regard. Somebody should say to you, this is definitely an important instruction by Prabhupada, but it's not for you yet. It's too premature for you to apply this particular instruction in your life. You try to apply some other instruction in your life. Because people often become confused. They hear this and hear that, and they try to apply everything at once, but it doesn't work like this. We still need a guide who has some spiritual experience and who has seen the mistakes of others, who has done a lot of mistakes himself. And he will be able to say, no, don't rush here, go a little slower here, try to apply first this instruction, and you will develop your Swarupa, don't worry about this. But first try to, not be attached to the fruits of your action before developing Swarupa.
I think that's a very important point you made, that when we are exposed to Srila Prabhupada's books, any reader immediately gets such an amazing treasure of knowledge. So, but if we read it in the association with devotees or have some guidance, then we can understand more, okay, which is our level and what is now important for us to apply. I think that's a very important point. Thank you so much, Maharaj. I don't know whether you have a last message to us, some last words of wisdom. We'd like to conclude this interview.
Well, I really wish all the devotees to be on this spiritual journey. We should never say that I know Prabhupada's books, because if somebody says I know Prabhupada's books, it means that he didn't even start studying Prabhupada's books in a real sense. We should understand that all these books have, many, many layers of meaning, and ultimately we have to hope that by our sincere endeavors to understand honestly what Prabhupada wants us to do, the books, which are living, they're not really, printed words. This is will reveal themselves to us. The revelation, sometimes people think that if somebody explained to them revelation, they can understand revelation. No, revelation remains a mystery, even if somebody explained the revelation. Revelation has to reveal itself to you. So reading of Prabhupada's books is the means to please the Supreme Absolute Truth so that it would reveal himself to you within your heart. That's how we should approach this devotional sadhana practice.
Thank you so much, Maharaj. It was wonderful to hear your realizations on this topic.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare
Yeah,
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama,